Why don't we create networks in healthcare that truly lean into the preventative model? And I think using social media or that kind of crowdsourced format makes the most sense for that type of preventative care. Because guess what? Our system does not work for preventative care.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Lindsay DeLong, the founder of EquipMeOT. Paul and Lindsay discuss how to create highly engaging and authentic healthcare content, educate and entertain all generations about health and rehabilitation, and lastly, how to bridge the gap between patients and providers with content. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
I am personally interested in your content strategy, and I promise not to dig more than 5 minutes on this, because just for the episode, I'm going to say the awkward part so that if anybody listening or watching hates it, this is totally my fault and not Lindsay's words. But it seems to me that most content in our industry sucks. It's boring. Yes. It's not entertaining. It doesn't deserve any attention at all. And nobody says that though, right? They're but your content's different. And I'm curious, I don't know how much you're willing to share. And if you want to take a pass, we can totally move to the next topic. But Lindsay, I'm totally curious. If I were to maybe, jump into your office, where you're working right now, and look at your computer when you're not looking, which by the way, sounds weird. Hear me out though. Is there a Google Doc or some strategy around your content? How much of your content right now that has millions of views, by the way, for anybody that hasn't looked, how much of your content strategy is just how Lindsay's brain works versus, standard operating procedures in Google Docs that you've sort of put together over the years? What does that look like?
This is such a funny question, because if you knew how my brain worked, you'd be scared. You'd be frightened. You'd run away. I'm not particularly analytic. I'm an occupational therapist by trade. And I think a lot of OTs tend to skew this direction. We're very creative. We're kind of come out of our origin story is out of the arts and crafts movement. So we're passionate about problem solving and hands-on, and really that doesn't lend itself to analytic, hyper-focused on strategy. And I'm not like that at all. So What happens when I pick a topic to talk about, 99% of it is I'm legitimately interested in the product or the topic. That's the first step. I do a little bit of background research. I do use search engine optimization for YouTube content specifically because of the Google search results, which has helped to grow things in that way. But when it came to the short form, the TikToks, the Reels, the YouTube shorts, that's straight out of just I saw something on Amazon. It looked funky. I'd never touched it before. I bet you other people are curious about it. And then I put my OT spin on it, which is, this is how this serves in an accessibility, inclusive design function. And so I really combined that just natural curiosity that I have. I'm one of those people that walks into a store and touches everything. I want to know how it works. I want to understand how people engage with it. That's a very natural tendency that I have. So my content strategy is literally, this is something I'm curious about. I bet I'm not alone. And that's how I do content.
Yeah. The interesting thing about what you just said there is it's the because I talk about this stuff with other people, and one of the common things is that they talk more like this, the way you just described it, right? That is, I'm not saying that what you're doing, by the way, is not unique. It's just that everybody doing this, you shared that model or that structure so casually and so cavalierly. And that is one of the common threads I've seen across all the most successful content creators, not just in healthcare, but elsewhere. Even guys you talk to Tony Maritato, he will tell you exactly how he thinks, just like you did. And he will, I think, say, he may not use the same words as you, but this concept of, hey, look, I only really want to talk about stuff that I find interesting, and sometimes other people find interesting. That's kind of what you said, And so I just say that because for anybody watching or listening, especially practice owners or business owners or whatever, they commonly first of all, most of them do nothing. Like they create no content, and then they wonder why no customers are coming, no patients are coming. And they're like, I wonder, I just thought if I was just to get my NPI and get credentialed, magically patients would rain from the ceiling and I would treat them and drive home in my 4 Ferraris. And then you're like, well, but I have medical debt now and I don't know why this business isn't working. But the point is that I just love how like cavalier and open you are about it. And I think for anybody watching and listening, so much about content creation is about avoiding all these people that like sell you the courses on how to create content. Because frankly, if you got to sell a course, why don't you just like make the content yourself anyway? And really just focus more on like, I love watching content creators and paying more attention to what they do.
Yeah, that's where I learned it. I learned it from watching others too, because I was like, I could watch one person doing something and be like, I'm not into this. Why am I not into this? And then evaluating that, kind of leaning into my own psychology to understand the psychology of others, not assuming we all think the same, but the general understanding of like global appeal is being able to look at things and then reflect. And that's what I've been doing. I'm a student of social media at this point. I have to be.
There's this like so it's interesting. I think I said to you in the pre-show, I'm 43. I don't feel old. I don't feel old. My joints disagree, but I don't feel old. But the thing is like, sometimes in the back of my mind, sometimes I'll be meeting with people, usually business people with like suits, and they work at venture firms and private equity, and they're really fancy towers and buildings and stuff like that. And they're like, so social media, like, what's your deal there? And I'm like, I don't know. and they're like, okay, but like, and then I guess what I'm getting to is that there's this, I was talking to this one guy, let me just get to the point. I was talking to this one industry analyst the other day, and he was talking about content creation within healthcare and whether or not it actually contributed to the bottom line. And, you know, I only had like 20 minutes with a guy. I had to then run to a meeting. And so I was like, I tried to be polite for about 10. So I was like, well, how do you think about it? Why, and he pulls out this spreadsheet. He's like, well, I'm trying to understand across our portfolio, like, our companies are spending this much money on social media as a percentage of revenue. And he's talking all these fancy things. And I was like, my man, here's the thing. Do you remember the movie Gladiator from 2000, and he's like, I mean, the kid was like 24. So like, I don't mean that in any condescending way. It turned out, I realized at that point, he was born the year that movie came out. So I had to then pull up a YouTube video really quickly on my phone. And there was this one line. I said, look, here's the deal. I was like, this badass named Maximus, he says, if you control the crowd, you control your freedom. And I was like, that's the line. And so now let's bring it back to content. I was like, buddy, I'll leave it to you and the fancy MBAs to figure out how to model it out and spreadsheet it out. But I know two things. I know, number one, that attribution is really hard today. Like, I bought a pair of pants from Nordstrom on the mobile app today. If some nerd somewhere looks at that and says, oh, the analytics say the mobile app is good, we should cancel all other spend, they'll probably feel really good in the moment. But what they'll never realize is my wife happened to see the pants on a TikTok, screenshotted it, texted it to me. I was just like, if my wife likes those pants, she might like me in them. You know where that goes. And so I'm like, hey, I'm buying them. So I give him that, and his eyes glaze over. And I'm like, okay, number two, I was like, but buddy, here's the thing. Like, traditional media, unless your customer sits in traditional media, I can't spend there. Like it's like nobody buying billing aware practice management in my world is sitting there watching or reading the New York Times print. I know other people do. My customer doesn't. And so ultimately I'm like, here's the thing. When it comes to content creation, you got to focus less on the platform and all these other things. And you got to realize that really what it's about is figuring out, how do you get in front of wherever your customers' eyeballs already are? And I think what's interesting about, you, and I'm just going to, just for a moment, I mean this out of full respect, just to make the point. I think what's really interesting is you and a lot of the successful creators, like if I were to just lump all you guys in together, the macro thing that I think is really, really fascinating is that the patients that we all serve are aging in. Like, yeah, there's a lot of talk about other patients aging out of things, whether they, are deceased or whatever. But what's interesting about this is, like, when you think about like you and Tony Maritato and Justin Stiver and all these other people, what's really fascinating is that people like me, 43, we're kind of aging into this stuff. And we're looking at Instagram. We're looking at TikTok. My mom may not be. And if that's your customer, if that's your patient, like, yeah, maybe content doesn't make sense. Anyway,
But your mom may not be, but because you are and you care about your mom, you're going to do exactly what your wife did about the pants. You're going to send information to those who need it. And that's the piece of it that I think is most fascinating that I have found is my demographic. I thought when I started this, my demographic was going to be a bunch of therapists, a bunch of OTs who were curious about things that they could share with their patients. And while that has come to fruition, and a lot of my audience are fellow therapists who share the content with their patients, which is an incredible scaffolded approach to being able to spread information to the people who aren't engaging on these platforms. The other half is a combination of end users, young, skews slightly younger, but I would say 60 and under, and that's they're very engaged. And then the other group is caregivers, young people. I get teenagers who reach out to me. My mom has MS. This would help her. And I realize like social media is the bridge between the caring part of the equation and the receiving part of the equation for so many, especially in the younger generation who are just taking in information like little sponges and bringing it to those who can use it, whether those people are utilizing the social media platforms or not. So I think it's kind of narrow-sighted when I talk to other healthcare providers who are like, I don't think my audience is there. And I'm like, you're not thinking about the entirety of your audience.
my superpower is to ramble, and so all right. So here's the thing. So let me bring the spotlight to you for a minute, because your business is really fascinating. The blood-sucking capitalist in me wants to talk about how it all works and kind of how you pick products and all that stuff. But before we get into that, can you give me, like, for anybody watching this right now, and we'll put like links to your website and everything, your Instagram, all that in the show notes. But give me like the, Lindsay's had 2 glasses of wine, attention spans even shorter than normal. What is the company? What is EquipOT?
So EquipMeOT is the parent company, and it is an LLC, and we have a website which provides basically blog form content with links directly to products that I share and demo and the videos I make to demonstrate them. So YouTube is our first and most profitable engine. I create long form YouTube content, and that content through ad revenue, I crossed over the 100,000 subs threshold earlier this year, which was a pretty cool milestone to hit, and that generates a lot of evergreen content that really powers a lot of what we do. The short form content, which is through the Instagram, TikTok, and then YouTube Shorts, was really born out of the long form content being more arduous to create. And I wanted something that I could create more frequently. And those videos are basically short snapshots of pieces of adaptive equipment and strategies that kind of fall out of those YouTube long form videos. So if I do a video on compression stockings on YouTube, it's going to include lots of information about managing compression stockings. But then I'll take and convert a lot of those little pieces of information into short videos that get shared across the small platforms. They all feed each other. My revenue streams are going to be ad revenue from YouTube. It's going to be the affiliate, which I am very limited in my affiliate. I tried to be a big old fat affiliate farmer for a minute. It's awful. It's impossible to manage. So I only do Amazon affiliate. That way, everything is in one place. For better or for worse, Amazon is what it is. And it's kind of the devil, and I find that my conversion rate, if I share a link to an Amazon product, is double digits. It's 10% or better on any Amazon-based product versus if I go direct to consumer website, like a Shopify website for a product, sub 5% across the board. It's much harder to get that click-through conversion from a social media post with any other affiliate-based program outside of Amazon. And that might be more specific to the type of products I'm sharing, but I think that people they are so comfortable and conditioned to click buy on Amazon versus many of those others where they have to create a login and a password and all of that. So that's something I've learned over the years. So that's a chunk of my revenue stream. And then recently within the year in 2023, March of 2023, we launched our a sub company underneath EquipMeOT, which is called EOT Wellness. And in this one, we actually create our own products. So we've actually launched 2 products. We have a long-handled lotion applicator and a long-handled body scrubber, both built on right along with my audience on Instagram. They were all part of the process through the stories, and they picked the colors, they helped with the design, they were my testers, and I was able to launch those products fairly successful, and we sell those through Amazon. And QVC came into the game with me last year, and a lot of the reason I was able to be successful in the product, the physical product, and is I already had a hungry group of buyers. I launched my scrub brush in March of 2023, and I sold out in 48 hours. So that influencer component to having that physical product market, we have 2 more products that we'll be releasing in 2025. So that's growing as our entity.
The thing I love about it though is that you were a practicing OT, and then now you're this. It's like this social. You're like a social media influencer. You're monetizing. You've built a business. And now you're creating products. So now you got to think about logistics and manufacturing and all that stuff. So like, there's a million ways we could go here. Selfishly, just because I openly admit to everybody, like I'm a capitalist. I like to invest in things and all that stuff. And I'm really fascinated about how it all works.
I realize one of the things that's overwhelming about what I've done is it's like the ADHD of my brain. It is very much, my business is very reflective of who I am as a person. It goes in a lot of directions, and I'm juggling a lot of things, but there's really a method to the madness. And I'm happy to kind of explore any of those categories.
You mentioned something in the pre-show, and I want to be respectful of your privacy, but you mentioned something in the pre-show casually, and if you don't want to talk about it, I will mark this and we will not talk about it. But out of curiosity, so you mentioned in the pre-show that you said, as a joke, maybe you were serious, probably serious, you said you married tech. So like for anybody listening, like I got no business relationship with you. We have no we have no like there's no affiliate thing between us or anything like that. So I genuinely find this interesting. Your playbook from the outside, you're running the tech playbook. You're generating attention. You started doing that. It looks like from what I can read online, you started, and even when I scroll back in your content, I can see, like, as I piece it together, I'm like, okay, she was practicing. She started doing reviews. The eyeballs started coming because she's good at delivery. And then most people stop there. Like I could name, I don't want to like embarrass anybody, but if we were to like go look at like the top top influencers on YouTube or Insta by volume in our industry, you can see they're doing reviews, but nobody's done the next step, which you did, which is you then looked at a certain subset of your eyeballs were interested in a certain thing, and then you built the product. It's kind of like you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to just sell that to them. Right, exactly. That's like the broad tech playbook, right?
Yes.
Build the audience, figure out what they want, put the product in front, control the margin, do it again a million times, So I'm curious, like, was that always the plan? Like, you said your husband was part of the business, and by the way, I'm not trying to take away from your skills, right?
This is not a question I get asked often because most people just want to know, like, pick it up from where I am. But the origin of this is just as important as the results, which we still don't know what the full result's going to be, obviously. In 2016, I was working in home health, and I was livid. Every day I'd come home from work and my husband would have to hear me talk about how I was getting booted out of cases before I had a chance to finish explaining and educating on certain topics.
Right. Probably because of like the
Insurance.
Profitability of the visit. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, the insurance would kick us out. And I was like, I can't get people's adaptive equipment installed in time. And some companies won't let you as a therapist because of the liability. But these people don't know how to do it, and they're just leaving a piece of important equipment in their garage and never installing it, and people are falling and landing back in the hospital. I wanted to prevent. So I made some YouTube videos. And I said, Adam, my blessed husband, who has been a saint through this process, not only does he have a tech back, he's such a good dude. I just hired him full time away from his very lucrative tech business 2 weeks ago. So now he's not only my co-founder, but he is my co-worker and my spouse. So
I hope you gave him like a horrible title. Like it's got to be like a total power move.
I told him he has to wear slacks every day.
Yes. I love it.
he has a bachelor's degree in film and video. So there you go. So he was like, let's make a video. Why not? We're bored. We had babies at home. We had nothing else to do. Let's film in the basement in the evenings. So we made 4 videos for YouTube on how to install a raised toilet seat and how to install and assemble a tub transfer bench. That's the origin story of the entire thing. Did not look at those videos again after we posted them for 4 years. We pull him up. He's been watching them, by the way, because at this point he's now working in tech. And he's watching them. He's like, YouTube likes your content. You have 60,000 views on one of these. That's legit. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm going to be a working OT for the rest of my life. Good luck. The pandemic hits.
Uh-huh.
My kids
I found the video, by the way.
You
This is
did?
great.
The OG one?
I am scrolling all the way back. Yeah.
Yeah, I
love
think
it.
I'm pregnant in one of them.
I
Like
love
it's
it.
yeah, my hair's I was going through some things. And we we were learning, but you have to start somewhere. And 4 years in, the pandemic hits and my kids get pulled out of school. All of a sudden, we don't have childcare. I quit my job. And he goes, again, it was him. He said, people's eyes are already here. Why don't you just keep doing what you were doing with patients, but do it on a macro scale? You were doing this one-on-one. Answer the questions that the patients were asking, but put it online. And I'm like, this is going to piss off some people who insist that that information be gatekept by the healthcare companies. But I was like, let's do it. So that's where it started. And I joined Instagram shortly after because I was bored and I was like at home. It was the pandemic. This is the origin story of so many companies. And then from there, it kind of blossomed. But you're absolutely right. It wouldn't have happened without his tech background, his business background. He worked in startups. He used to attend bootstrapping conferences. He knew what we could build and how we could kind of structure it to have a future. And I was just a mouth and a face with ideas. So together, we really created this. I cannot take full credit.
Well, but I will say to you, and that's so humble of you too, but I would say that, in most, I'm just going to use tech as a broader industry. Like with the tech industry, um, over the last 20 years or so, it naturally pushes itself into more and more areas. I just Venmoed a friend of mine money for a group gift. 20 years ago, you could only do that through a bank. I'd have to write a check or whatever, right? And then tech sort of pushed in. I'm paraphrasing, but like people forget that like PayPal, which probably very few people listening to this uses anymore, but PayPal was like one of the first big winners there. And so I guess where I'm going with this is over the years, tech has pushed into all these other industries.
Yes.
And most of those industries had almost like a very low bar to entry, because like banking, for example, had a higher bar to entry because you have regulations and stuff, right? But we think about like software as a service, we think about social media, all these things that grew, right? But then like when I think about healthcare, like I will fully admit, I'll just speak for myself. I never really took any interest in healthcare as an entrepreneur until about 3 or 4 years ago. And I won't bore you with the story, but here's where I'm going to try to just tie it back to what you just said there. One of the things about healthcare is that you kind of need a license to do anything in it. Okay, well, we want that. You don't want your doctor or your nurse or anything like that, like not knowing what they're doing. That credibility, that also brings you a certain amount of credibility. That a tech entrepreneur, like to say it more bluntly, people like your husband or we're not going to be a PT or an OT. We're never going to be a DPT. We're never going to be an MD. None of those things, right? Like we could be, but that's just not our goal. So there's only so much we can push in. Now we can bring in skills, like a certain way of thinking and a certain skill, but then the real opportunity is for the people in the industry to then use that. And I think where I'm going with this is like, here's my thesis as an investor in the industry now. And again, full disclosure, I'm not an investor in your company and whatever, right? SEC people don't come after me. Here's the, by the way, yet I can say yet. But here's the thing. I remember one day I was talking to somebody at a conference and he was like, "What are you doing in this industry?" And I was like, to be honest, we might have had a beer or two. And so he was like, "What are you doing here anyway?" And I was like, am I supposed to give you the corporate answer or like the street answer? This guy's like a VP at a publicly traded company that everybody knows in this industry. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, am I supposed to give you the corporate answer or the street answer? And he was like, what? I want both. And I was like, well, the corporate answer is like better patient outcomes and everything I'm supposed to say. Let me check with my PR people. Yeah, yeah, this is it, and so he's like, okay, what's the street answer? And I was like, I think 39 years old when I realized that healthcare spending is 20% of this country, and 10% of that is MSK broadly. And by the way, math nerds, don't kill me, but just 10% of that is MSK. Okay, so that's about $4 trillion, give or take. I mean, we're rounding here, 4 trillion, whatever. And coming from the tech world, when we see $1 billion opportunity, we call it a unicorn. There's 4,000 billion-dollar opportunities just in MSK. And I was like, the street answer is, this is like, there's a ton of money in this industry that can also impact people and make their lives better. It kind of feels like a win-win, and kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, as I get older, I don't want to feel like a dirtbag. So being able to like help people and make some money kind of feels good.
It's funny, I don't want to interrupt and break your train of thought, but my husband came from a very similar like mindset. He'd been working in these startups in the tech sector where they were producing something, but it just, he was working in areas that were like, I'm not giving to anybody. Like, these are products that are being bought, but he's like, I want to build something that matters. And when I started as a healthcare provider, I just wanted to help people. Still to this day, I would do it for free. And I have to be yelled at on a regular basis for trying to give it away. I try to give everything away because I care deeply about this work. And so combining with him and understanding the business aspect of it is that it's just that. It's like we can all win if we focus on helping and we do it in a way that is also advantageous in a business model. It's balancing those two things. And healthcare is a space that is ripe for disruption in that type of business model.
What I was trying to poorly articulate is that because of like the licensing requirements that are, I think, required. I mean, we want medical professionals to be licensed. They should be.
I still have my license, by the way.
Right. But because of that like initial barrier to entry, I think the biggest change within healthcare, within OT, PT, just even healthcare, is actually going to come from the inside. People like me, your husband, others, we might be able to like push some ideas in, bring in some tactics and techniques and structures that could work. But by and large, in this case, for example, OTs trust other OTs, PTs trust other PTs. You guys know the lingo. And ultimately, I think it's really interesting. Like, you've embraced this and built a real business around this. Guys like Justin Stiver own practices, but now have huge YouTube channels. Like
Yep.
he's leveraging these playbooks, and like I think it's a win-win because you're making money, you're building, income and wealth for your family. Patients are getting access to it.
Yeah.
They could be sitting at a Starbucks in Tulsa, and seeing how to prevent and treat bed sores.
And that I think it's the breaking down of barriers across all those different aspects, not just business barriers, how to reach clients, how to reach customers, but the healthcare barriers. We live in a country that does not have a good healthcare model. We are a mess, and anyone working in healthcare knows it. And that frustration is what bred the business in the first place. It started, that was the tipping point for me, was like, I cannot stand the fact that we are gatekeeping information that could save lives. And this is silly. And that frustration was so real in me, it still is. And it's what gets us up every day.
Not to get philosophical on you, but one of the things that I think about more than I should lately is this idea that technology just always, since the beginning of time, technology has always destroyed middlemen. By the way, I'm not trying to be like gender specific. Middle women, I don't care. But anybody that was like a gatekeeper, yeah, there you go. Anybody that was like a gatekeeper of information, technology by and large always breaks it. They are the ones that have to worry. Like, just one bad example here, just for anybody listening to, so they kind of really connect the dots, and then I'm going to bring it back to you. People forget that, like today, I can go on my Wealthfront app and say I want to buy $1 of IBM. I don't even know what the share price is, and but like you and I don't think about that. In 2024, we can do it whenever. People don't realize or remember that, like, as recently as 30 years ago, the New York Stock Exchange used to close. Right now, the New York Stock Exchange is closed, like, it's only open like 9:30 to 5 or 9:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, right? But even worse than that, 30 years ago, it would also close on Wednesdays because somebody had to like process the paper. And because of all these middlemen, you couldn't buy $1 of IBM, and if somebody in Michigan wanted to buy a share of anything, they'd have to like do a big enough order to make it worthwhile for somebody down there in New York to actually put a piece of paper on a pin. And then someday, 3 days later, somebody would turn that thing over and whatever. So I guess just to fast forward, as technology came in, servers, internet, whatever, here we are 30 years later. We don't care if the market's open or not. We can just buy $1
Yep.
and buy a fractional. I don't even, like, none of us really know. So now I bring it back to healthcare. You know, I think that if I were to pick, I'm going to say this assertively, but I'm curious if you would agree with me or disagree, poke holes. I think if I were to randomly select 100 clinicians from around the country, just randomly select 100 clinicians, line them up and say, maybe ask them the question of like, what value do you provide
Mm.
to a patient? And I know that came out like sarcastic or weird, but if I genuinely tried to ask that question, disarm all their like egos and everything like that, I think what they've been trained to believe, maybe implicitly, like I don't think anybody explicitly ever said like gatekeep the information. Implicitly, I think what they've been taught is they would say their answers would likely be, we help patients get a better outcome when they come see us. I'm 43, but I came from a different country when I was little, and I speak Eastern languages and stuff like that. And English is my second language. What's interesting to me is words really matter because English is so muddy. In other countries, other languages, Arabic, Hindi, Spanish, Portuguese, where every language is very specific. So when people say subtle things like, oh yeah, I help create better patient outcomes. All they got to do is just come see me, schedule with me, whatever. That one little part that is alarming is the part that says, come see me, which when there was no social media and when there was like no video, that made sense, right? Yeah, obviously, if I want to get better in 1989, I probably need to ask mom to take me to the doctor, right? Again, I don't think I'm a weirdo. The other day I had to like a weird light came on my car, and I'm like, oh shit, I got to take the kids to school. Like, is this an all day problem? And it's like I like Google it, what is this light? It takes me to a YouTube video that's like, oh, that means that the washer sensor is loose. Just replug this in. I watched a YouTube video and I fixed it. And then later it was like, I should probably buy that part because I just kind of like taped the little sensor back on. It just so happened the creator of the YouTube video had captured my email and was like, hey, you're probably going to need this. Here's $7. And I buy the part, right? That's the point here is that like, I think most clinicians are still thinking that way, that you know, their value is in the actual, coming to see them. When in fact, like what you're doing is you're sort of taking the walls of your practice and
Yes.
pushing them all the way out. Like that's, and again, I'm not saying this well, but there's a compliment in here too. And I hope that more practice owners look at this and more clinicians look at this and kind of think about themselves, right? Like instead of asking your boss for a raise, what if you did what Lindsay did? I think is really fascinating. Instead of paying the newspaper or the local soccer league for a logo on a jersey, what if you did what Lindsay did and built a relationship with patients, but the point is ultimately is this idea of like, what would happen if you just did the opposite of what everybody else in your industry believes?
I won't lie. When I think you're onto it because one of the things that they do teach you is within the healthcare industry, it's not that we're so much intentionally gatekeeping. It's that we're so scared that information will reach somebody from our mouths to their ears and they will take that information and get hurt. There's so much fear tied up in providing healthcare because we don't want to get sued. So, one of the things that I had to tackle in myself when I started making this content was there has to be a giant disclaimer. Anytime you provide medical advice that isn't medical advice on the internet, which is rampant, and much of it is, in fact, not great. Trying to maintain the highest level of integrity as a licensed healthcare provider while also taking down all of the protective barriers, because those barriers are not just there to keep people out, they also protect the healthcare providers from what can come at them if something bad happens, right? Like we live in a very litigious society. We cannot afford literally and monetarily, we cannot afford to have something bad happen and have that blood on our hands.
Yeah.
We are taught that from day one.
Right.
So it is not as simple as just saying, get out there, get online, talk about your stuff. It is a cautious approach that I've had to continually. One of the things I struggle with is I get reached out to by brands daily. Hundreds of brands wanna, and it's great. It's a great problem to have. But as a licensed healthcare provider, first, and somebody who believes in the authentic sharing of true, factual, valid reviews and information, I cannot simply say, sure, I'll take $1,000 to share your product, even though I don't think it's a good product and it could result in somebody getting hurt. I can't do that. And so I turn down more projects than I can even begin to imagine because of that problem. It is a very real balancing act for healthcare providers to provide medical, non medical advice on the internet. And we've seen it go very right with providers who are doing it very cautiously and carefully and honestly with high integrity. And we've seen it go very, very wrong. If you're a physical therapist out there and you're like, I'm just going to put my exercises out on the internet, great. But every person is not built the same.
Yeah.
If I give generalized information like how to do these very specific transfers with my able body, guess who's not doing those transfers? Able-bodied individuals. And so there's so much more nuance to and this is what I've had to, when I brought my husband in, which was really fascinating to me. He's not tied to healthcare at all. So he acts as the non-healthcare set of eyes and ears. And what he has reminded me, and this is the secret, I think, is show, don't tell. Let the individual, people don't recognize me. This is what always cracks me up. I go to big conferences and stuff, and I'm a fairly ubiquitous character in their subconscious. They don't see me. They don't recognize me. I don't get found. And you know why? Because they're not watching me. They're watching what I'm doing. It's show, don't tell. I don't talk too much. I want to show you something and let you superimpose what that means to you onto the content. Super important, because I don't want you looking at me and saying, she's giving me funky advice. I'm not giving you anything. I'm showing you something that you can use to take to your in-person therapist to start a conversation. And that's where I think it's a balance between, I'm not replacing a healthcare provider.
Yeah.
I'm acting as a bridge between an individual sitting in their living room who's struggling with something and the therapist that they have been brought to, that they're working with. And they bring my video and they say, hey, would this be something I could do? And now we're having that combined value of introducing an idea that they can kind of see themselves using and then bringing it to their healthcare provider. I can't replace a healthcare provider, but I can give people that conversation starter. So it's a precarious position to find yourself in as a healthcare.
You haven't said this directly yet, but I have a feeling you're not going to disagree with me on this. You have this like sort of like that transparency that you have this sort of like, I think it's safe to say that if I said to you, what should the playbook, like what would Lindsay do if she owned a PT or OT practice? Like, what does the content strategy look like? I have a feeling you would just talk about it. Right. And I think that would be a really, really interesting conversation as like a part 2 of this, is to say, okay, here's all the ideas that she has and she's built this business, but let's get more tactical. What let's just pick, anyway, it'll be an interesting second episode if you're up for it. But here's the thing, like just talking about like the business of content that you're doing. I have this like theory that what we've seen happen in other industries always will happen. Actually, let me say it a different way. I have this theory that like there's really nothing new that ever happens. It's just it happens again and again. The same thing happens again and again in different industries. It's just a matter of time. So, for example, what we've seen in the tech world, particularly over the last 5 years, right? Let's just broadly say that, again, from my little piece of the world, I would say broadly that 1995 to 2010 was what I call sort of the first wave of the internet. We were all just trying to figure out what this thing was, and figuring out like, well, okay, what is like social media and how do you pay people online? What does that even look like? And then I feel like 2010 to maybe 2020 was really like, okay, what's a social media thing? Oh my gosh, you can get more eyeballs on stuff. You don't have to be rich and buy a TV ad across the country. You don't have to have the Super Bowl ad because you could go viral, And so that was like that second era of, whatever. And I think it subtly started to create this idea that distribution was equally as important as whatever product or service you provide. And I think we're now in this like third era or phase of that industry in general, where the most successful content creators are getting bought they are buying the software as a service companies. So in other words, I'm sorry, the other way, let me say it the other way. The what we're seeing right now in the tech industry is the most successful content creators are getting bought up by the most profitable software companies, but they're maintaining their freedom to create content. So like we look at what HubSpot did. HubSpot, starting 4 years ago, started buying small media companies and podcasts and YouTubers. And, full disclosure, we were investors in a bunch of them. That's how I started to see like this consolidation. And I remember asking the corporate development people over there about what in the world the strategy was. And they're like, he was very direct. He was like, look, we're going to have to spend the ad money anyway. Why not just, instead of spending it in terms of third party relationships, like renting the audience from Facebook ads or Google ads, what if we just reallocate the money into these creators and let them go and let them stop worrying about selling ads or doing reviews and just say, do more interesting stuff. And oh, by the way, HubSpot's the only thing the only common connection is just to say you're part of the HubSpot media network. And that bet seems to be playing out. And where I'm going with this is, I think it's a matter of time before we see that in healthcare. And I don't think it's going to be the big payers or anybody like that. I think what's going to happen is, I think one of two things is going to happen. Somebody like you is going to become the Mr. Beast equivalent, like in terms of distribution. Yes.
God willing.
God, I hope that right there is going to be on the cover for this episode right there. All right. So Thomas Kiley, we got to make this happen. That's going to be so great. But I feel like one of two things is going to happen probably within the next 5 to 10 years. One thing that could happen is a creator like you that's going to connect with patients, both current and future. Like somebody's going to just become so engaging, give away so much content that people are going to say, oh my gosh, how can she possibly give this all away for free? And through that access to distribution, somebody like you is going to then take the Mr. Beast model of essentially buying and owning the businesses. And I know that sounds weird to anybody that hates capitalism, but that's kind of unfortunately what happens. Or the opposite of that's going to happen, which is the most interesting, maybe infrastructure software companies in the industry will come to people like you and say, hey, what would it look like to just make all your problems go away and have you just kind of keep doing what you're doing? But, oh, by the way, can it be part of our pod? Like, it's going to be the HubSpot version of healthcare. So we'll see where that goes. But like, again, everything we've seen in every industry kind of already happened in some other industry.
It's definitely feels we're in an interesting space because the conversations I'm having on the business side of it have changed drastically in the last 3 years. Now, I've also grown drastically in the last 3 years, but I think the conversations have become much more the healthcare space is like, how do we make this work for us? And it doesn't always feel like the right kind of conversation. I don't think the right questions are being asked often. But there are the occasions where I have conversations where I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. When we're talking about how we can utilize authentic, globally reaching ideas like, hey, we are all living on a continuum of disability. What does it mean to be prepared for disability instead of having to constantly react? And if I'm making content that prepares you for an inevitability, like I rolled my ankle walking the dog and now found myself on crutches for 6 weeks, we're all just living that way. Why don't we create networks in healthcare that really truly lean into the preventative model? And I think using social media or that kind of crowdsourced format makes the most sense for that type of preventative care. Because guess what? Our system does not work for preventative care. We cannot turn this ship around and be like, you know what? We're going to change it. We're no longer going to be responsive. We're going to be preventative. That isn't happening. So social media is the place where people are gathering that preventative information, and we could legitimately improve outcomes for the healthcare of the global healthcare society by just simply making that content available in every place possible in a high quality way.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.